A 90-year-old farmer faces down ruthless outlaws threatening his home. But his last resort isn't a shotgun. It's a phone call that brings a shocking past crashing into the present. Who did he call? And what secret history could possibly scare men like Rattlesnake? The dust on my porch hadn't even settled right when they first showed up. I was sitting in my rocking chair, same place I sit most afternoons, watching the sun start to dip low over the west pasture. My farm. 90 years I've lived on this very spot. Born in the little room right off the kitchen, grew up helping my pa work the fields, took it over when he got too old, then worked it myself through dry years and good years, through times of sorrow and times of quiet happiness. Every fence post has a memory. Every stone wall tells a story only I can read. This place isn't just dirt and wood, it's part of my bones. And that's why, when the sound of horses that didn't belong came riding up my lane, a cold knot formed in my stomach. 3 of them, big men, with rough clothes and eyes that darted around like hungry birds. Their leader rode a mean-looking bay horse, and he had a patchy beard that made him look like a snake shedding its skin, only meaner. I heard folks in the closest town whisper about a new gang that had drifted into the territory, causing trouble, leaning on folks. They called the leader Rattlesnake, and seeing him up close, I understood why. There was something slithery and dangerous about him. They stopped right in front of my porch, blocking the sun, casting long, dark shadows. Silas. Rattlesnake's voice was low and gravelly, like stones tumbling in a dry creek bed. He didn't sound friendly, not one bit. I nodded slow, staying seated. My hands, gnarled and marked by a lifetime of work, rested on the arms of the chair. I didn't feel 90 years old then. I felt like an old badger backed into its den, ready to snap. That's right, I said, my voice a bit shaky, but I hoped they didn't notice. Who's asking? Rattlesnake grinned, and it wasn't a nice sight. Heard you got a nice piece of land here, Silas. Good soil, plenty of space. His eyes swept across my fields, across the barn, the small farmhouse. It felt like he was undressing my home with his gaze. We're looking to buy. Buy? The word hung in the air like a bad smell. My farm? The place where my ma planted the rose bush that still blooms by the well. Where my pa taught me to plow a straight furrow. Where every single memory I have lives. This farm ain't for sale, I said, louder this time, trying to put some firmness in my voice. Rattlesnake's grin faded, replaced by a look that promised trouble. Everything's got a price, old man, he said, leaning forward in his saddle. His friends shifted behind him, their hands resting near the guns tucked into their belts. The message was clear. This wasn't a friendly offer. This was a threat wrapped up in fake politeness. Fear, sharp and cold, pierced through me. I'm just an old man. My farming days are mostly over. My strength isn't what it was. How could I possibly stand up to men like these? Young, strong, and mean as corner wolves. But looking at the farm, at the home that held my entire life story, a different kind of feeling rose up, defiance. This was mine. They couldn't just take it. Not this farm. I repeated, shaking my head slowly. Not ever. Rattlesnake's eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake, Silas, he said, his voice losing all pretense of friendliness. It was a low growl now. We'll be back. And next time, we ain't gonna be asking so nice. He stared hard at me for another moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then he jerked his head at his men, and they turned their horses. The sound of their hooves riding away felt heavy, like the closing of a cell door. I sat there for a long time after they were gone, the silence feeling louder than the horses had been. The sun was almost gone now, casting long, purple shadows. The air felt colder. They said they'd be back. The threat wasn't just words. I saw it in their eyes, felt it in the way they looked at my land. What was I going to do? I was all alone out here. No family nearby. My closest neighbors a long ride away. The world had changed. It wasn't the same as when I was a young man, when folks helped each other out. Now, it felt like everyone was for themselves. That night, sleep was a stranger. Every noise outside had me sitting bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. A branch scraping against the window sounded like footsteps. The wind sighing through the trees sounded like whispers. I got out of bed, pulled my old work pants on over my long johns, and went to the living room. I took my shotgun down from the rack above the fireplace. It was old, like me, but well cared for. Loaded it slow, the familiar click of the metal a small comfort in the vast, scary silence of the night. I sat in the chair by the window, the shotgun across my lap, just watching the darkness. My eyes ached, but I couldn't close them. I kept thinking about Rattlesnake's face, the coldness in his eyes. They wanted my farm. Why? Was it just because it was good land? Or was there something else? I didn't know, and not knowing made the fear worse. The helplessness of being 90 years old and facing down men who had no respect for age or property was a heavy blanket covering me. I felt every single one of those 90 years then, weighing me down, making me feel weak and fragile. Just as the first faint hint of gray light started to appear on the horizon, chasing away the deepest parts of the night, I saw movement. At the far edge of my property, where the lower pasture meets the line of old oaks. 3 figures, on horseback. They were just sitting there, still as statues, watching. They weren't coming closer, not yet. They were just observing, like predators watching their prey. My hand tightened on the shotgun. Were they waiting for me to step outside, to show I was alone? Or were they planning something else entirely? The sun was coming up, but the feeling of dread didn't lift with the darkness. They were here, and they were waiting. What were they waiting for? The morning after seeing them watching, the air on the farm felt different. Tense, like the sky before a big thunderstorm. I went about my chores like normal, feeding the chickens, milking the one old cow I still kept, but my eyes were constantly scanning the tree line, the road, the edges of my fields. Every shadow seemed to hide a watcher. That feeling of being seen, of not being alone, even when I was the only soul on the farm, was like a prickly heat under my skin. It stole the simple peace I usually found in the quiet work. They didn't ride up to the house again right away. They were cleverer than that. They started small, little things that mess with your head. One morning, I found my mailbox lying on the ground, kicked off its post. No big deal to fix, really, but it was a message. We were here. Another day, I rode my old tractor down to the back pasture to check the fences and found a section had been cut clean through. My few cows could have easily wandered off. More work for me, more worry. It was like they were slowly chipping away at my peace, making me feel vulnerable, reminding me they could get to me whenever they wanted. It felt like a slow tightening of ropes. These weren't just random vandals. This was planned. They were leaning on me, trying to wear me down. I thought about going to the sheriff again. I had called his office after the first visit. The young deputy answered, wrote down my name and what happened, but mostly just said they'd look into it. The sheriff's office is a good long ride away in the county seat. Out here, folks mostly handle their own problems, or they're out of luck. The outlaws knew that. They were counting on me being too old, too far away from help, too alone. I tried calling the sheriff again after the fence cutting. I got the sheriff himself this time, Sheriff Brody. He's a good man, but busy, with a territory bigger than some states back east. I explained about the cut fence, about Rattlesnake, about them watching me. He listened patiently, but I could hear the sigh in his voice even over the phone. Silas, he said, I understand you're worried. But without them actually doing something, breaking in, stealing something big, there's not much I can do. These gangs, they're slippery. They don't leave much proof. And frankly, my resources are spread thin. It wasn't his fault, not really. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing the law admit it couldn't protect me from this creeping threat, made the knot in my stomach twist tighter. I was on my own. Days turned into a week, maybe a little more. The small acts of meanness continued. A window pane broken in the old tool shed. The gate to the north field left wide open. Just enough to make me feel unsettled, to make me know they were still there, always watching, always waiting. My nerves were frayed. I wasn't sleeping much, wasn't eating right. The farm, my sanctuary, felt like a cage. Then Rattlesnake came back. This time, he rode up alone. The sun was high, beating down on the yard, but his presence felt cold. He dismounted slow, his eyes sweeping around again, taking everything in. He walked right up to the bottom step of the porch and stood there, looking up at me. There was no smile this time, no fake politeness. His face was hard, his eyes cold and sharp. "Silas," he said, his voice flat, "our patience is wearing thin. We gave you a chance to be reasonable." I just looked at him, my jaw tight. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? He took a step closer. "This is the last time I'm asking nice," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Sell the farm. Name a price, we'll talk. Or," he paused, letting his eyes bore into mine, "or we take it anyway. And you won't like how that happens. You got till sundown tomorrow." Sundown tomorrow. The words hit me like a physical blow. He was giving me an ultimatum. Sell my home, my history, my life, or lose it all anyway, likely in a much harder way. My mind raced, trying to find an answer, a way out. There was none. I was 90 years old, alone, facing a ruthless man who clearly meant every word. The vastness of the farm suddenly felt impossibly large, too much for me to protect. The weight of my age felt crushing. After he rode away, the silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't just empty, it felt heavy with the ticking clock. Sundown tomorrow. I walked the farm, my usual afternoon walk, but this time it felt like a farewell tour. I ran my hand along the old fence posts, looked at the way the light hit the leaves on the oak tree, watched the lazy flight of a hawk overhead. Was I really going to lose all of this? Was this how my story ended? Defeated, forced off my own land? Despair settled deep in my chest, heavy and cold. I sat on the back porch steps, watching the sun begin its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery colors. It was beautiful, but I felt nothing but a vast emptiness. What could I do? Who could help me? I was at the end of my rope. My thoughts drifted back, further than the farm, further than my quiet life here. Back to a different time, a time of travel, of different kinds of people, of different kinds of rules. A life I had deliberately left behind, packed away like old clothes in a trunk. It felt like a lifetime ago, like it belonged to a different person. But as the sky turned deeper shades of purple and orange, a name, a face, a promise from that distant past surfaced in my mind. It was a desperate thought, maybe a foolish one. It was a connection to a world that had nothing to do with farming or peaceful sunsets. A world I'd hoped I'd never need to touch again. But Rattlesnake and his gang belonged to that world, not mine. Maybe, just maybe, that old life held the key to protecting this one. It was a long shot, a crazy idea born of desperation. But as the light faded, it felt like the only shot I had left. I stood up, my old joints protesting, and turned toward the house, my mind fixed on one thing, the old dusty rotary phone hanging on the kitchen wall. The one with the number I hadn't dialed in 50 years. Could it still connect me to the past that might save my future? My hand was shaking, just a little, as I reached for the old phone. It hung on the kitchen wall, a funny old box with a round dial. Not one of those fancy new ones you see in town. Dust lay thick on it, because who calls from a phone like this anymore? Not many folks even have my number out here. But this number wasn't for folks nearby. It was for a past life, a different world I'd closed the door on 50 years ago. Could that door still open? Would anyone even be on the other side? This felt like the biggest gamble of my 90 years. Rattlesnake's deadline was sundown tomorrow. Time was running out faster than sand in a sifter. My finger went into the hole for the first number on the dial. I pulled it around until it hit the little metal stop. Whir, then the next number. Whir. Each turn of the dial felt like winding an old clock backward, back through the quiet years on the farm, back to dustier roads and harder faces. The numbers were etched into my memory, burned there from a time when remembering them could mean the difference between making it through the night and not. My hand kept trembling. What if I remembered wrong? What if the number was disconnected? What if the person on the other end was gone? The silence in the kitchen felt huge, just the sound of my breathing and the little clicks and whirs of the old phone. It started to ring. An old-fashioned brawling, loud in the quiet house. It rang once. My heart jumped. It rang again. Hope flickered. A third time. Doubt started to creep in cold and nasty. Maybe it was all a foolish idea. Maybe that past was dead and buried, just like I'd wanted it to be. Just as I was about to hang up, to admit defeat, I heard it. A click, and then a voice. It wasn't young, but it wasn't old and shaky like mine. It was a voice that sounded like it had seen things, done things. A voice with strength in it. A voice I hadn't heard in half a century. Yeah, the voice said. It was just one word, but the way it was said, it held a question, a readiness. It wasn't a voice that expected a friendly chat. My own voice came out raspy. Hello, I managed. Is this? I didn't know how to ask. I just said my name. It's Silas. Silence. A long, heavy silence that made the tiny hairs on my arms stand up. Had they hung up? Did they not remember? Then the voice again, but different now. Filled with surprise, disbelief. Silas? Silas who? Silas, from back then. I said, my throat tight with a rush of feeling I hadn't expected. From a network. The one who went quiet. The one who settled down. Another pause, shorter this time, but the air crackled with it. Then a low chuckle, a sound like dry leaves rustling. Well, I'll be Silas. 90 years old and still kicking, I hope. The voice was warmer now, but still held that edge. It was him. It was truly him. The person I had hoped against hope would still be at this number. I couldn't believe it. 50 years. Still kicking, I said, a watery laugh escaping me. But I'm in a bit of trouble. I took a deep breath and told him, quick and simple, about the outlaws, about Rattlesnake, about them wanting my farm and giving me till sundown tomorrow. I didn't go into all the little acts of meanness, just the main threat. My voice trembled as I spoke, laying bare my fear and helplessness. As I talked, the voice on the other end changed again. The warmth faded, replaced by something hard, something like steel. It was the sound of the person I remembered from that old life, someone who handled problems, who dealt with the world's sharp edges. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, not the surprised kind from before, but a thoughtful one. Then he spoke, and his voice was low, serious. Outlaws, you say? Rattlesnake? Never heard of him, but the name fits the type. Threatening your farm, Silas. There was a dangerous edge to that last part. It wasn't just about my farm. It was about me, about the connection we shared, however old it was. Yes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. They mean it. I can see it in their eyes. He was quiet again for a beat. I could almost hear his mind working, reaching across the years, assessing the situation. Then the sound of a hand slapping down on wood, sharp and final. All right, Silas, he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. You held up your end of things, built your quiet life. Now someone's threatening it. That doesn't sit right. A wave of relief, so strong it made my knees weak, washed over me. He wasn't saying no. He wasn't telling me I was on my own. What can you do? I asked, barely daring to hope. His reply was simple, but it carried the weight of a promise from a different time. Just hold on, Silas. Hold on tight. You called the right number. We're coming home. We're coming home. The words echoed in my ears after I hung up the phone. We, not just him, others? The thought was almost too much to take in. I leaned against the wall, the old phone still warm from being used, feeling a mix of shock, relief, and a deep, unsettling sense of stepping back into a life I'd carefully buried. Why had I left that life? I'd wanted peace. I'd wanted a place that was truly mine, built with honest work under the sun, not whatever that other life was. It was a life where you learned to read people fast, where trust was earned slow and lost quick, where problems weren't solved with polite conversation or calls to the sheriff. It was a life of movement, of secrets, of dealing with the kind of people Rattlesnake reminded me of. I had wanted roots, not roads, and I had found them here on this farm. Now, the past I'd run from was maybe the only thing that could save the life I'd built. It felt like a strange, dangerous twist of fate. The sun was setting now, marking the end of the day before the deadline. Help was supposedly coming. But from where? How many? And when would they get here? Sundown tomorrow felt very close. I still had to get through the night and all of tomorrow, knowing they were out there, watching, waiting for me to give up. Calling that number felt like opening a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through again, even by bringing its echoes here. The wait had just begun, and the uncertainty was a heavy blanket. The next morning arrived, gray and quiet, but the quiet felt watchful, like held breath. Sundown tomorrow was now sundown today. The time I had left was shrinking with every minute the sun climbed higher in the sky. My conversation from last night felt almost like a dream. Had I really called that number? Had that voice really promised help? Or was it just the desperate hope of an old man? The doubt gnawed at me, a cold, sharp feeling in my gut. I made coffee, my hand still feeling a little shaky. I looked out the window at the farm. It looked the same, peaceful fields, the old barn standing solid. But I knew it wasn't peaceful. It was under threat, and the people threatening it were out there, somewhere. I walked out onto the porch, the air cool and still. I scanned the horizon, the road leading up to my place, the tree lines. Nothing, just the usual morning sounds. Birds chirping, the distant lowing of cattle. Was the quiet a good sign or a bad one? I spent the morning doing small chores, trying to keep my mind busy, but it was no use. Every time I turned a corner, every time I looked up, I half expected to see them. Rattlesnake and his gang. They didn't show themselves, not at first, but I found little things that told me they were still around, still pressing. Like the single black feather tied to my gatepost, a small, dark message. Or the way the gate to my backfield was left just slightly ajar, even though I knew I'd closed it tight the night before. Little jabs, little reminders. Asterisk, we're here. We're watching. The clock is ticking. Asterisk. The sheriff was too far, too busy. My neighbors couldn't help. It all came back to that phone call, to the voice on the other end. Who was he now? What kind of life did he lead? What did "we're coming home" even mean? My mind went back to that time, the time before the farm. It wasn't a life of breaking the law, not exactly, but it wasn't strictly inside the lines either. It was about keeping a certain kind of order in places where the law didn't reach or didn't care to. We looked out for each other, had each other's backs. It required being sharp, being ready, knowing who you could trust, and knowing how to handle people who thought they could just take what they wanted. I had left because I was tired. Tired of the looking over your shoulder, tired of the dust and the uncertainty. I wanted something solid, something that grew, something peaceful. I found it here, but that life had given me skills, connections. Had I called on a connection that was still strong enough to matter? Or had time washed everything away? The doubt was a poison, making the waiting feel even heavier. Midday came and went. The sun started its slow slide towards the west. Sundown was getting closer. My stomach was a tight knot. I checked the shotgun again, loaded it, unloaded it, loaded it again. It felt like a toy against the kind of threat Rattlesnake represented, but it was all I had, short of the hope from that phone call. I walked out behind the barn, looking towards the hills in the distance, the direction the phone call might have come from. Was anyone out there? Were they on their way? Then I saw it. A flicker of movement on the horizon, far off. Hard to see clearly, just a smudge against the line where the sky met the earth. More movement. A group. On horseback. My heart leaped into my throat. Was it them? Rattlesnake's gang, coming early? Or was it the help? I stood there, frozen, watching them. They were still too far away to tell clearly. They weren't riding fast. Not yet. They were moving steadily towards my farm. Not directly up the main road, but across the fields, approaching from a different angle. It was the kind of approach someone might make if they didn't want to be seen right away, if they were being cautious. That seemed promising. Rattlesnake usually rode in bold and loud. But what if it was a trick? What if it was more of Rattlesnake's men coming to surround the place, to make sure I had nowhere to run when sundown hit? I couldn't tell. They were getting closer now, the shapes of the riders becoming clearer. There seemed to be quite a few of them, more than Rattlesnake had brought the first time. My hand instinctively went to where I'd left the shotgun by the door. Were these the people who had answered my call? Or was this another twist I hadn't seen coming, maybe a different kind of threat entirely? They rode on, getting closer and closer to the edge of my land, and I still didn't know who they were or what they wanted as sundown loomed. My heart hammered like a drum against my ribs. They were closer now, the riders I'd spotted on the horizon, getting bigger, clearer, riding steadily towards my farm. Who were they? Were they the hell my old friend had promised? Or was this another gang, maybe even worse than Rattlesnake's? The sun was starting its long, slow slide down the sky. Sundown felt like it was rushing towards me now, and with it, Rattlesnake's deadline. I stood by the edge of the porch, straining my eyes, trying to make them out. There were more of them than the 3 Rattlesnake usually rode with. Maybe 10, maybe 12 riders. They were spreading out a little as they got closer, moving like they knew exactly where they were going. Not just a group of folks riding together. This looked planned, organized. As they got closer still, maybe half a mile away, I started to see details. They weren't wearing matching uniforms like soldiers, but their clothes looked tough, worn like they spent a lot of time outside, riding. Some wore hats pulled low, shielding their faces. I could see the glint of metal, buckles, maybe something else. They rode their horses easy, confident. There was a feeling about them, even from this distance, that wasn't like the casual meanness of Rattlesnake's gang. These riders had a purpose. They felt sharper, more focused. Then, a flash of something caught the light on one of the lead riders. Something on his jacket near the shoulder. It wasn't a shiny star like a sheriff's badge, but something else. Something shaped different. My breath hitched. It sparked a memory deep down of markings of symbols people wore back in that other life to show who they were with, who they belonged to. A hook of recognition snagged in my mind, pulling at threads of memory I hadn't touched in decades. Could it be? They rode up to the edge of my property line, not onto the driveway, but spread out along the tree line and the fence. They stopped there, silent for a moment, surveying the farm. It was like they were drawing a line in the sand. You come this far and no further. Then, one rider, the one I'd seen the glint on, separated from the rest and rode slowly towards the house. He wasn't coming fast or aggressive. He was coming deliberate. My hand was still near the shotgun inside the door, but a different feeling was starting to bubble up inside me. Not just fear, something like awe, and a little bit of fear still, because this group, even if they were here to help, came from a world that wasn't gentle. The lead rider stopped about 50 feet from my porch. He dismounted, leaving his horse standing calm. He was a solid-looking man, not young, not old as me, but weathered like good leather. He had kind eyes, but they were sharp, missing nothing. He wore a long duster coat that looked like it had seen plenty of use. And on his chest, a simple piece of metal pin there. It wasn't a star. It was a different shape. A shape that was deeply, instantly familiar to me from that forgotten time. It was the symbol of the network I had been a part of. The symbol of the people who kept a certain kind of peace in places where the normal peace didn't reach. He looked at me, standing on the porch, and gave a small, respectful nod. "Silas," he called out, his voice clear and steady. It was him, the man I called last night. Tom had changed his voice a little, but it was definitely him. My old friend, the one I'd known from a lifetime ago. Tears welled up my eyes, unexpected and hot. He wasn't just an old friend. He was one of them, one of the key people in that whole hidden world. And he had come. He had brought others with him. The we he talked about on the phone. "It's me." I managed to call back, my voice thick. He smiled then, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Good to see you, Silas," he said. Looking well. He didn't try to come closer, didn't crowd me. He just stood there, a calm, strong presence, with his riders fanned out behind him, silent, watchful. They weren't pointing guns, weren't acting like fighters, but their stillness, their readiness, spoke louder than any threats. They were a shield, suddenly placed between my farm and the danger that was coming. My old friend didn't need me to explain anything else. He already knew. He looked around the farm, his gaze lingering on the edges of the property where Rattlesnake's men had been watching. He looked towards the road Rattlesnake would likely use to come back. Then he looked back at me. "We got your call," he said. "Glad you still had the number. Heard you had some trouble with folks who don't respect property." It was an understatement, but his tone carried weight. He turned and gave a signal to his riders, a simple hand gesture. Without a sound, some of them dismounted and began moving quietly along the fence lines, disappearing into the trees and the dips in the land. They were setting up positions, securing the perimeter. It was efficient, silent work, the kind of work done by people who knew exactly what they were doing, who had done it before. They were making my farm a place that wasn't easy to just ride into and take. They were building a quiet wall, Rattlesnake and his gang hadn't shown up yet. Their sundown deadline wasn't quite here. But when they did come, they weren't going to find just an old man waiting for them. They were going to find these people. People who operated by a different code with different strengths. My shocking phone call hadn't just reached an old friend. It had reached into a network, a brotherhood, a force I thought was just a memory. And they had answered. They were here. They had secured my farm. The air was still tense, the final confrontation still looming, but for the first time in days, I felt a sense of safety settle over me. These were the people who kept the wolves from the door in the world I'd left behind. Now, they were here to keep the wolves from my door. What would Rattlesnake do when he found out who he was really up against? The silence hung heavy as sundown crept closer. My old friend, the one I had called, whose name I hadn't even said out loud in 50 years. Let's just call him the Marshal now, because that's what he was in his own way, walked slowly towards the porch. His riders were hidden now, unseen but definitely there, melted into the landscape around my farm. The air felt charged, like static electricity before lightning strikes. Rattlesnake's deadline was just minutes away. Where were they? The Marshal stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at me. There was a look of respect in his eyes, something that acknowledged the years, the life I had built here. Silas, he said, his voice quiet. It's been a long time. Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again. Especially not like this. Didn't think I'd ever need to call. I replied, my voice steadier now. Seeing him, seeing his people had put some backbone back in me. Didn't think this kind of trouble would find its way to my quiet little corner of the world. He nodded, his eyes scanning the peaceful fields around us. Trouble has a way of finding good places, he said, especially when folks think there's nobody to stand up for them. He paused, then looked me square in the eye. You did the right thing, Silas. Reaching out. We look out for our own. Always have. Our own. The words held a deep meaning. It wasn't just friends helping friends. It was about the network. The people who knew the hidden paths, who understood the underbelly of the world, and who had a code. They weren't sheriffs, like I said, but they dealt with problems the sheriffs couldn't or wouldn't. They had their own ways of making things right, of protecting those who were part of their world, even if they'd stepped away from it like I had. My old friend, the Marshal, was one of the most respected. He led a group of people who were skilled, disciplined, and loyal. They knew how to handle dangerous situations, how to make trouble disappear, not with loud fights usually, but with quiet, certain pressure. They dealt in reputation, in knowing things, in showing up when expected least by the bad guys. Just then, the sound of horses broke the quiet. Coming up the road, Rattlesnake, right on time for his sundown deadline. 3 riders, just like the first day. Rattlesnake in front, his usual swagger in his posture, probably expecting to find me sitting on the porch, scared and ready to give in. The Marshal turned to face the road, his posture changing, becoming still and ready. He didn't draw a gun, didn't shout. He just waited. Rattlesnake rode up the lane, his boots kicking up dust. He stopped his horse, maybe 30 feet from the house, looking towards the porch. He grinned, a mean, unpleasant sight. Well, old man, he called out. Sundown's here. Time to decide. His eyes swept over the porch, expecting to see only me. But then his grin froze. His eyes darted to the side, then the other. He saw the horses of the Marshal's riders, tied just out of sight behind the barn and the trees. He saw the way the air felt different, the unnatural stillness. He hadn't expected anyone else. His swagger started to deflate like a leaky balloon. He looked back at the porch, his eyes narrowing, trying to understand. That's when he saw the Marshal, standing calmly at the bottom of the steps, and the symbol pinned to his chest. Rattlesnake's face went pale under his patchy beard. His eyes widened in shock, then in fear. It was clear he recognized the symbol. He recognized who the Marshal was, or at least what he represented. The man he thought was just a weak old farmer had somehow called upon a force he clearly knew was bad news. The Marshal stepped forward slowly, his hands open, showing they held no weapons. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it carried across the yard, clear and cold as ice. Rattlesnake, he said. Not a question, a statement. Rattlesnake flinched at the sound of his name, spoken with that quiet authority. You're trespassing on Silas's land. You're threatening a man who is under our protection." He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The very presence of his riders, unseen but felt, and the clear meaning of the symbol he wore, were enough. He wasn't just saying Silas had friends. He was saying Silas was connected. Connected to a network that people like Rattlesnake feared. Rattlesnake stared at the marshal, then at me, then back at the marshal. His face was a mask of disbelief and dawning terror. He had ridden here expecting an easy win against a 90-year-old. Instead, he had ridden right into the path of people he knew, deep down, were far more dangerous than he was. The kind of people who made problems disappear. He knew he was caught. The silent riders around the property, the calm, unyielding presence of the marshal, the recognition of that feared symbol, it all added up to one thing. He had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. His hand hovered near his gun, but he didn't dare draw. He was trapped, not by force, but by the sheer weight of who had answered my call. My simple, desperate phone call had unleashed a power Rattlesnake never dreamed an old farmer could command. The standoff was silent, tense, but the outcome was already decided, not by bullets, but by reputation and fear. The air crackled with a silence louder than any shouting. Rattlesnake sat on his horse, frozen, staring at the marshal standing calm at the bottom of my porch steps and at the symbol on his chest. His face, just moments ago full of mean swagger, was now a mask of pure, cold fear. He looked around again, his eyes darting from one clump of trees to another, knowing the riders were there, hidden, watching his every move. He knew he was caught. He hadn't ridden up here to fight an army. He'd come to bully an old man, and he had found something much, much worse for him. The hook that had snagged him wasn't a trap of steel, but a trap of reputation, of knowing who you absolutely did not want to cross. The marshal didn't raise his voice, didn't make a big show. He just kept his steady gaze on Rattlesnake. "Your deadline is here," the marshal said, his voice still quiet, but with a hardness to it that cut through the tension. "You came to take something that isn't yours. You threatened someone who is under our protection." He gestured slightly towards me on the porch with a tilt of his head. "That was a mistake, Rattlesnake. A big one." Rattlesnake swallowed hard. I could see the struggle on his face, the meanness fighting with the understanding that he was completely outmatched. He was like a wolf that thought it had found a lost lamb, only to find the lamb was guarded by a pack of much bigger, quieter predators. The marshal continued, laying out the simple terms. "You and your men will drop your weapons, slow and easy. Then you'll get off Silas's land, and you will ride away from here and never, ever come back. Not to this farm, not to this area." His voice wasn't angry, just certain. "If you do, there will be consequences. Consequences you won't like. Consequences that will find you, no matter where you try to hide." He wasn't just saying it, he was promising it. Rattlesnake knew people like the marshal kept their promises, especially the bad ones for folks who crossed them. Rattlesnake's shoulders slumped just a little. The fight drained out of him. He looked at his two men behind him, who were just as wide-eyed and scared as he was. They weren't fighters when the odds weren't stacked in their favor. They were bullies, and they knew they were no match for the silent, organized force surrounding them. Rattlesnake slowly, very slowly, took his hand away from his gun belt. He looked down for a second, defeated. Then, with a heavy sigh that I could almost hear from the porch, he reached down and unbuckled his gun belt. The sound of it hitting the dusty ground was loud in the quiet yard. Clatter. His two men hesitated for just a second, then quickly did the same, their guns and belts falling to the dirt. Asterisk clatter. Clatter. Asterisk the metal line there looked small and useless now. The threat they represented, just moments ago, so big and terrifying, seemed to shrink. They had surrendered, not because they were shot at, but because they understood the power of the people who had answered my call. The power of a name, a reputation, a network that operated in the shadows they thought they controlled. The marshal gave another small signal, and two riders emerged from the trees, quiet as ghosts. They walked towards the outlaws, their movements calm and sure. They didn't rough them up, didn't shout. They just instructed Rattlesnake and his men to step away from their weapons. Then, they quickly and efficiently tied their hands behind their backs with rope. It was done with a kind of practiced ease that showed this wasn't the first time they'd done this. It was quiet, professional, final. Once their hands were tied, the marshal spoke to Rattlesnake one last time, his voice low. Consider this a lesson, Rattlesnake. There are places you don't go, people you don't touch. Silas is one of them now. Forget you ever saw this farm. Forget you ever saw his face. If we hear you've even thought about coming back or sending someone else, well, you already heard what happens. There was no threat of physical harm now, but the implication of future consequences was clear and chilling. The two riders who had secured the outlaws led their horses forward. Rattlesnake and his men were told to get back on their horses, even with their hands tied. Then, with the two riders walking alongside, holding the reins, they turned the horses around and led the outlaws back the way they came. They rode off slowly, a small, defeated group, disappearing down the road, escorted off my land by the quiet, capable force I had called upon. The threat, the immediate physical danger to my farm was leaving, riding away in defeat. I stood on the porch, watching them go, the dust rising behind them. My knees felt weak. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong I had to grip the porch railing to stay standing. It was over, just like that. Not with a shootout, not with bloodshed on my land, but with the simple, overwhelming presence of people who carried a different kind of authority. I looked at the marshal, who was now walking back towards the porch, and at the places where his riders were still hidden, ensuring the outlaws were well and truly gone. My farm was safe, saved by a phone call and the unexpected strength of a past I had tried to leave behind. It felt surreal. The dust from Rattlesnake and his gang riding away had settled, and a real quiet started to return to the farm. Not the tense, watchful quiet from before, but the natural peace of the countryside. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in beautiful colors. It felt like the end of a very long, scary day. The marshal walked back up onto the porch and sat down on the step below me. His riders slowly, quietly, emerged from their hiding spots around the farm, gathering near the barn, staying alert but relaxed. They were like shadows coming back into the light. The immediate danger was gone, but what now? My unexpected guests were still here. They won't be back, the marshal said, his voice calm and certain. The word will spread quickly after this. Folks like Rattlesnake rely on picking easy targets. They know not to cross us. Crossing Silas now means crossing the network. They won't risk it. The network, I said, the word feeling strange on my tongue after so many years. It's still active? He smiled. More than active, Silas. The world still has corners where the law doesn't reach or where problems need handling differently. We just make sure some kind of balance is kept. Protect those who need it. Deal with those who think rules don't apply to them. He explained it simply, like he was talking about fixing a fence. It wasn't about being outlaws ourselves, but about being a force that understood that world, that could move within it and make things happen, make problems go away, using knowledge and reputation more often than force. I never thought. I started, shaking my head. I left that all behind. Wanted peace, quiet. Never thought I'd need it again. And you build a good life, Silas, the marshal said, looking around my farm with genuine respect. A life worth protecting. That's why we came. You weren't just anyone. You were one of us. You were respected. You always had a good head on your shoulders, saw things clear. Even back then. He paused. When I heard it was Silas, I knew it was important. We don't get calls from folks who've been quiet for 50 years unless it's serious. Loyalty doesn't have an expiration date, old friend. He told me they had systems, ways of knowing things. People in different towns, different places who shared information. They knew Rattlesnake's type. They could make sure his message about my farm being protected spread far and wide in the places where it needed to be heard. He assured me I wouldn't need that old phone number again, not unless something truly extraordinary happened. They had other ways to check in, quiet ways. My peace wouldn't be disturbed again by the likes of Rattlesnake. Soon, it was time for them to leave. The marshal stood up. His riders mounted their horses, quiet and efficient as they had been since they arrived. They weren't staying for dinner, weren't looking for thanks. They had done what they came to do. protected one of their own. The marshal walked over to me and held out his hand. I took it, his grip firm and warm. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming. For remembering. Always, Silas," he said. "You just live your life. Enjoy your farm. It's safe now." He turned and mounted his horse. With a nod, the marshal led his riders away from the barn, not towards the main road, but cutting across the lower pasture towards the hills they had appeared from. They rode out as quietly as they had arrived, a group of skilled, capable people disappearing back into the world where they operated, leaving my farm peaceful once more. I watched until they were just specks in the distance, then until they were gone entirely. I was alone on the farm again. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of orange and purple in the sky. The air was cool and fresh. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, deep tiredness, but also an immense feeling of relief and gratitude. My farm was safe. My home was still mine. All because, when I was at my lowest point, facing down men who thought I was weak and alone, I had reached out, gambling on a memory, on an old number, on a past life I had tried to forget. And that past had answered. It had come back, not to bring trouble, but to bring protection, to show that some bonds, some networks, some loyalties never truly fade. I looked out on my fields, bathed in the soft twilight, and knew that my 90 years had held more twists and turns, more unexpected strengths than I had ever imagined. My farm was safe, and I knew, finally, I wasn't alone.